Welcome to the PraXis podcast. PraXis is a conversation about the intersection of science-based wellness and Christian spiritual practice. We cover three topic areas: mindfulness, fitness, and diet. For more information, you can just Google us at PraXis Christian Wellness. Hey everybody, thanks for coming. I'm sitting here with three of my favorite folks, favorite pastors in the whole world, especially in the wellness space. It's Pastor Phil Vestal from RuahSpace, Pastor Andru Morgan from Parkrose United Methodist, and former wellness director at John 3:16, and Pastor Aaron Miller at University Hill Community up in UBC, beautiful, beautiful British Columbia, at the campus of the University of British Columbia. You guys have all been very involved in this conversation about wellness and embodied Christian spiritual practice. So really appreciate you guys taking the time to sit down and have just like a freewheeling discussion about this topic. And if you want to just maybe also add a little short introduction and then just what you see as the need in terms of Christian wellness. Is that a need? And do you see it as something that can really be married between Christian spiritual practice and healthy living? Is that even something that can be done?
Yeah.
Andrew, you want to go first?
Yeah, I guess I will. So I think for me, I want to just jump in by saying, I had a background of as soon as I got into ministry work, which was pretty much the day I decided I made an adult decision to live my life for Christ. And fitness went hand in hand. And I didn't really see or notice the pattern until later down the line. But fitness put me in a position, like working on my fitness, working on where I was. It put me in a position to absolutely connect into community in a different way than I thought community could exist. And as I get a chance to kind of speak in this conversation, I'll kind of just put some of those examples out there. But there were multiple scriptures that I was always told to look at that was in reference to fitness that never spoke to me. The most practical side of it was just doing it. And so in other words, I kind of had a Nike theology. And when it came to fitness in that regard. And so getting out there, just doing it stretched my faith because it was tearing my body and testing my body. And my mind had to be strong to endure the race, so to speak. So that's a little bit of, I ran a fit program and a homeless and drug recovery program. And so these were men we had to be very, very careful with how we get them back to a healthy place, but also use fitness from a social standpoint and also implement Christian values in it. And then recently I've been pastoring an elderly congregation, and fitness was already ingrained into what they did multiple times a week on a basis of this was their lifestyle and how they prolong their life. So that's really where I'm coming from with my experience in this area.
Bill, you want to jump in? You guys could just, jump in
Sure.
Whenever.
Yeah. So thanks for sharing that, Andrew. I look forward to talking to you guys more about this, getting to know you a little bit more. But for me, it came from multiple angles. And I guess one, when you're in ministry, it's really easy to forget about your health, to forget about the importance of the body. And I think there's just this trajectory in the Western church overall to speak to the mind that theology, mainly it's about what we believe, having orthodox, correct belief, right? But it's sort of a form of modern day Gnosticism, if you will, that the body is forgotten about, yet how consistently God speaks through our body, even just our emotions and what we feel, even things that we often don't maybe like to feel, like anger or grief or doubt or whatever it is. Even those things can be the Holy Spirit speaking to us. And so, taking care of our bodies and fitness, learning to feel what we're feeling and where, being able to name it. These are more ways for us to connect to God. It's more ways for us to connect with our own story, to be who God made us to be. And so rather than shoving that stuff down or ignoring it, having a fitness component to our faith is an important part of being present to what's going on, what we're feeling, and where we're going.
Cool. Yeah, I'm sort of the odd man out here. I feel like I don't have any practical experience guiding people in fitness as a spiritual practice. But part of the reason I'm so kind of supportive of what you're doing, Cornelius, is that I think it's really important, and I think it's really interesting. I think you're asking interesting questions and guiding people in interesting ways. So I'm glad to be supporting it. I would say that I like the notion, Phil, that that forgetting about our bodies is just sort of modern Gnosticism. I think that's absolutely right. And I started working out for myself and just enjoying exercise generally because my work had me sitting an awful lot. And I was in rural ministry, which meant that everywhere I went, they fed me. So I was just, mostly it's vanity. I just didn't want to get out of shape. But I think too that Christianity is an incarnate religion. It's an embodied, it's an embodied faith. It's always been that way. God, presumably when God decided to create, God could have created disembodied beings, I suppose. But this is, formed from the dust. This is God's good plan for us. And so I think that because this seems to matter to God, it should matter to us. And our bodies really are the temple of the Holy Spirit, then they're pretty important places. So I think the combination makes perfect sense, and it's odd to me that those two things got so dissociated, especially after we condemned Gnosticism.
Now, you, Pastor Aaron, are into spiritual practices, and what I'm thinking of is the Lectio Divina that we have done in the past, which can be seen as a form of mindfulness, which is also part of the wellness formula, which is a healthy body in some ways starts with a healthy mind, one that can sit with itself in silence without rattling around in the cage between the ears. And so what is your experience with being able to sit in silence, and how that plays into your spirituality?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think that, I think for me that is sort of a kind of a disembodied, that tends to be intellectual, it tends to be heart stuff. And so I think it's really important. And we all, all the studies show that, breathing is good for you. Paying attention and being present is good for you. And prayer is good for you because it connects you to the source and sustainer of life. But I do think, I could definitely, I guess for my risk, I suppose, is that I could definitely just sit here and sit quietly with scripture all day and probably develop some sort of heart problem. So, I think that my own spiritual practices don't necessarily lead to a kind of physical wellness. So I actually need to be conscious of it.
But go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go, Phil. Go.
No, just as you were saying that, though, the breathing aspect, though, really is so important. How easily we lose our breath, and how, as a culture, we've become mouth breathers, right? Often. And the problem with that is, of course, it activates our fight or flight response, right? And so returning to nose breathing, there's studies now and books written about how just breathing in and out of your nose actually improves your health as compared to breathing in and out of your mouth. And so I would even argue that sitting and just focusing in on breathing correctly is actually an extremely healthy physical practice as well. But I would even say, you know, part of sitting in silence has a major physical component. And maybe you have experienced it or had a different experience, but, you know, I've struggled throughout my life with things like anxiety and other physical tics and those types of issues. So when I started sitting in silence, man, my whole body was screaming. Like, it was just, I want to move. I can't sit here. You start to feel all sort of things, and sort of learning to be comfortable being uncomfortable. So I think we can talk about fitness as like a lot of movement, but I think we can even talk about the embodied spirituality as paying attention to our body in the stillness and in the silence and learning to be comfortable. And, you know, if I spend a whole day running around, but then finally sit down for a meditation, man, that's when I start to feel the pain, right? Or that's when I start to notice something. So I don't know. I would even say that you can bring it in even just to sitting. I think there's a lot of elements that can merge together in that space.
Yeah.
I think Pastor Aaron brings up a good point, which I hear a lot and I see a lot, which is just the not the sedentary nature of the church, but in your experience, is there a need for like a more healthy approach to spiritual practice? I mean, and without like, you know, naming names, you know, I think Andru, you know, if I could say it, you know, I've had, you know, I think you were ones like, there was a lot of pastors at one point when the Daniel diet came out that they looked around and they had fat churches. I mean, is this literally a need out there that you personally have seen?
You know, and when I talk about that, I mentioned the mega pastor Rick Warren, who wrote the Daniel Fast Guide book probably in 2015, and he based it off of baptizing, you know, multiple people in his church that day, and all of them were overweight. And he looked at himself and he was overweight, and he realized that what he projected to his core members was what they strive to be, or what they allowed themselves to give themselves a break on. If he's a prolific speaker, if he's one that is, you know, making a lot of money, he's the example of wealth and God's grace in someone's life, and he's putting all of this on display in the physical, they're going to follow each one of those things. And that's part of the discipleship element. We do recognize that we follow the examples of those who are part of our spiritual formation. And so I agreed with that portion of his writing, and what he was saying was because I recognize that as a leader, I know people are looking toward me. And I also know that there was this thin line that I had to walk in, even that expression of, I want to be a fine example to everyone, but on the same token, I wanted to do it for the Lord. Like, I wanted to do it with the Lord. I didn't want to do it absent of God, because vanity was always lurking. And with that vanity was always self-doubt, was always a comparison to, you know, am I trim enough? Am I this? I got down to a point where I was at like a 15% body fat, but my depression was high, you know, and I could run, you know, 16 miles in a day, but my anxiety throughout that entire run was off if I was doing it to compete or to look a particular way. And so I had to learn to do the exercises with God as a companion. And that leaked over into other areas of leadership. So to return back to that notion, it's like, I looked around and I recognized, okay, I have to be a good example, but I also have to gauge, what is God saying to me? Yes, God is going to give me the desires of my heart, but am I making sure that I'm checking in so that though, you know, because I know some of my desires are close to my flesh, and they're, you know, I may come into it saying, I want to be down to this weight, or I want to be there. Finding the piece of just being like, hey, I'm good where I'm at in this particular place. And this particular place is healthy. You were speaking about finding your breath. And this is absolutely right. When you walk by faith, you have to live a life with fear. Not that God gave you a spirit of fear, but in order to walk in courage, you're going to have to do some things scared. And to be able to have control of your breathing, to be able to clearly say, you know, to be able to get into a mental space to say, Holy Spirit, what now? What next should I do, to be able to block out what's physically in front of you, to allow the Lord to kind of just take over the atmosphere? It takes for you to be able to have complete control over your body, which is, you know, what we learn through fasting and what we learn through meditation also.
Yeah, I want to. I'm in Vancouver, and you know, people are kind of health and fitness obsessed here. So like I think I just want to. You're absolutely right that we can do this totally disconnected from anything healthy. I mean, you can be unhealthily obsessed with being healthy, or being fit, for all kinds of reasons. And I guess that's part of the reason I like what you're doing is actually being really intentional about marrying those two things. That the being fit and healthy is a way to honor God, can be a form of worship, but it can also be a form of, you know, self-worship. And in a culture like the one that I exist in, where, you know, everybody's in good shape, it's kind of unnerving, actually. You know, it's weird to say that there's Christian a culture that's really in, you know, everybody's in shape and most people are non-religious or irreligious. And you know, so to say that there's something of Jesus happening at the gym, I think is a bit of a countercultural or thought.
I think that's some of the disconnect you're getting at. Great way of saying everybody's fit and nobody's Christian. You know, that's hyperbolic, but I think, you know, my cousin brought this up. We were talking about yoga and the difference between Hindu spirituality and Christian spirituality, and you know, the idea of Gnosticism came up. This idea of that the body is sort of bad in some way, and like the spirit is good, and you just want to not focus on the material world. And she was like, it's kind of funny that you should say that, because most Hindus are in shape and take better care of their bodies. And I was like, yeah, that's it. And this is just, I mean, I'm talking about North America and the United States, and here we're talking about this sensitive issue. You know, I brought it up, the F word. And how do you help people discern, like Andrew was saying, between when you're good enough and when you need to really address some issues there? Medically speaking, we know CDC will tell you that 70%, unbelievable, 70% of the US population is overweight or obese. And then you have to, so that's a fact, right? That's just like medically in danger. 113 million obese people in the United States who will need dialysis as they get older. But you have to wrestle with, yeah, like when does it become body pride? When does it become some sort of obsession? When does it become dangerous? And how do you, and this is a question for anybody who wants to take it, is like, how do you navigate that in the context of body positive, people not being shamed, and that larger conversation that we're all aware of?
And this isn't the full answer. I'm sure that you know, Aaron and Andrew may have more insight into this. But I think for me, you know, it's more and more things are becoming locally focused in my mind, that these types of things need to happen out of relationship. That it's one thing to sort of put something out there on a large scale, and then, yeah, you can sort of float in any direction, right? And that's not saying large scale things are bad, but to me, the real work then has to be done in personal relationship. Because I can say something to my wife and my wife can say something to me that I could not say to my neighbor, and that I would not hear well coming from my neighbor, if that makes sense. And you can't have this type of trust and intimacy with everybody. But I think this is just, and again, we can take the conversation in other directions, which is not necessarily my intention, but this is why we are created in the image of a triune communal God, because we need one another. And I think these types of conversations and this type of accountability can only really happen when we are going through this journey with others that are journeying with us, that can speak into that can hold us accountable in both directions of both, hey, am I ignoring my body completely and not caring about my fitness? And on the other hand, sort of keeping me accountable to my motives and where I'm kind of going with it. And so I think this is just really where it comes down to having people in our lives that can speak to this and see us, that aren't as close as we are to our own body, but have sort of the right to come alongside and journey with us in this type of thing. So small groups of people, small community church groups, those types of things to me are the places where this can really happen in a healthy way.
I think to kind of address the question a little bit is relationship, like being honest about relationship with what status you are with your health, meaning even taking a look at where you are mentally with your relationship with food, with the relationship of exercise, and with the relationship of all these things as it relates to the traumas that you've had in your life, as it relates to even the culture that you're in. So, for example, we spoke of a church earlier that, well, the pastor decided to get in shape, and so the rest of the congregation got in shape. Well, if the rest of the congregation is doing one thing, are you doing this as a result of fitting in? And is this linked to a childhood trauma? Is this linked to a desire to be people pleasing? Is this linked to something that's godly? And I think that's part of taking the time and entering into the space that's associated with what God commands, and those things of to meditate on what is beautiful, to take time to actually meditate and put your focus in a space of truth and speak truth into, bring truth to the light with the honesty of where you are. And I think my relationship, what I've noticed with the patterns, and I can speak to it from a personal standpoint also, the relationships that I noticed that I was having with the things that were placing me in the like obesity category and the thing were ungodly relationships that I was using as a crutch. Not to say that everyone's situation is the same, but I recognize that I recognize just being truthful. Holy Spirit will give you an unction and a conviction to exercise if it's what your body needs. God does not leave nor forsake your physical being. And so that ability and that desire within me to quench out that voice saying, get up and run today, or get up and go and do this, was indicative to like showing where my actual relationship with God was, because my lack of ability to be obedient, to listen to God in all forms and be obedient to God in all forms, there was an evidence, and so I grew up and I heard my mother say like really simplistic things such as you can choose to sin, but you can't choose the consequence. And there's a small, and I'm not going to go into like the theological part of whether that's sound or not, but just using that as an example of saying like, if I choose today for whatever variety of reasons to rest when I have a conviction to move, if I choose to do this, then what I am choosing to do is to let in some things that will have a result and that I can allow to create a stronghold, or to let a bitter root kind of settle in those spaces. And so for me, I always recognized that was one of the ways of navigating a relationship with someone without having to tell them like, hey man, you're fat, you're this, you're that, is to eliminate the physical part, because it's just like the iceberg theory. Like, I'm not going to address the tip. Let's go underneath the water. Let's look at this 90% that we don't see. Why are we skipping the gym today? Why are we doing these things? And typically, without ever having to say, you're getting a little bit overweight or this or that, you can help address some of those issues and go and cut to the heart of real actual healing, which is what most people in those situations and what we all need is actual healing of our soul and our body simultaneously.
That's great.
That's a good word. Yeah. I think that I think there's a bit of principalities and powers thing going on too, because I think that like people just don't have, it's an economic problem in a lot of cases. I mean, most people who are rich are fit, you know, at least in my experience. Maybe that's too broad a stroke, but you know, the reality is a lot of people live in food deserts. A lot of people, you know, I mean, I think there's something kind of demonic about the amount of salt and sugar in so much processed food. You know, we told people that it was going to be so much easier if they just ate this way, but it's, you know, in fact, it's killing them. And so I don't know, you know, from a church perspective or a pastoral perspective, I think it's hard to. I think you're onto something, Phil. That we need to. There's certain things you can't say on a pastoral visit, but I mean, there are other conversations that we can have about what it, and you know, I think that part of what you're doing through PraXis, the act of eating together, and you know, making good food and sitting down, even virtually, I think is probably the sort of thing that that is worth pursuing as communities. Because I just think I remember reading in one of Shane Claiborne's books about, you know, they decided to grow tomatoes in, you know, some abandoned lot, and like kids had never seen a fresh tomato before. They had no idea. They thought tomatoes came in cans, and you know, if they're in cans, they're probably salted, and you know, so I don't know. I think that I think we probably have some fairly systemic things to talk about as well if we're gonna really take this on. But also, Andrew, you know, like I think that I just learned about this thing called internal family systems. I don't know if anybody. But anyway, if you're familiar with that, it's really worth checking out. It helps make a lot of sense of the way we do things. But you know, one of the firefighters, one of the things that like jumps in to protect us when we're under stress or attack or vulnerable is sugar. So I think that you're right that we also need to, you know, address people's spiritual ailments as we address their physical ones.
Yeah, you know, and just speaking about like the big sociological picture, you know, there's like no, I don't know if people are really sure why there's an obesity epidemic in the United States, but there was one interesting study that showed that the rates of obesity began to climb as the rates of smoking declined. And so to me, what's at the core of that is stress. People smoke to relieve stress. And when they realize that smoking is a dangerous option, you know, that's what happens, right? When you give up alcohol or give up smoking, you just start to eat. But this, like Andrew was saying, it's not about how you look. It's about something else underneath. And yeah, like what about just, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, like I learned this little bit of trivia recently. I had no idea about this, but cigarettes weren't really a thing before the First World War. And what happened is that the soldiers were given cigarettes because it was cheaper than feeding them, and they could slake their hunger. And so they all came back from the war addicted to cigarettes.
Jeez.
And here we are. So there you go.
We'll taking it out of like the abstract. Is someone's speaker on? I think is anybody hearing a feedback?
No.
Okay. So just taking it out of the theoretical and into like, what has been your experience with this stuff on the ground? Like, how has, you know, have you had these conversations? Have you tried to model this? I know, Andrew, you have a lot of experience here. And, you know, what has been the acceptance, the transformation, or the pushback that you've seen? And yeah, I mean, and what is well, let's start with there.
What was the last part of that? You said, what is the what now?
Well, just like how have you seen people, how do people respond to these things? Does it improve their lives? Do you have examples of that working with people and helping them in this way? Do people say, no, you can tell me how, you know, you can tell me how to pray, but you can't tell me how to eat?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people don't. I'm sorry, I had myself on mute. Yeah, so I think a lot of people, it was always difficult for me, especially I had to learn cultural competency as it regards to looking at where a person's from and where, and where to begin with them, because there's like like that cigarette stat that, was just mentioned. Well, the great generation, would view their laboring as a form of exercise. Like we're sturdy, we're this, we're that. And so it was very difficult for me, being someone from a different generation, to convince like some of the older people at one point, that would come through my ministry to do some things. But then I also noticed that individuals who were from, blue collar, rough and tumble kind of situations, it once again drew back to exercise is a leisurely activity. It is not something that we get a chance to do. Why would I have to pay to do this? It was something that you only do when you have time. Hence, most people only got in shape if they went to jail or they were in a situation where it's like, now I have time to do this. So there is a justice piece to the ministry of exercise, understanding that you have to break a mindset first and grant accessibility into a space. I ran a running group specifically for homeless individuals. So my program paid for them to enter the race. Most races ran about $40 to enter. And so that's $40 that they don't have. Then the average runner is going to need, maybe if you're running consistently, you're going to need multiple pair of shoes, and running shoes run around $150 for an adult that's really, really running and doesn't want to injure themselves. So we had to resource and find people to sow a seed into the ministry to say, hey, when you buy a pair of running shoes, can you give us yours, your old ones, or can you buy another pair for us? Though that type of work then put people in a position to, when the race would start, they would look around and they had on the race day t-shirt and they had on a pair of Brooks, or they had on, the same shoes that another runner had. And then all of a sudden they weren't defined by their sin. They weren't defined by their mistakes, homeless, drug addict, or any of those places that society put them in. They were just another person. And it was the same effect of taking them to the gym, giving individuals access to the places that we unfortunately have placed wellness into. It's the same thing with walking into Whole Foods and knowing they don't take food stamps, going into these places that are part of the gentrification cycle. Like they place them into these neighborhoods. It's whole food. The name in itself indicates that what we have in the hood is half food or quarter food or something different, because, and so you begin to catch on to what society says. So first, starting with not ignoring the justice piece, which is something that Jesus always did, was address the justice. Like, and he came to address it. And so basically giving us an opportunity, giving people an opportunity to have access to things is one of the first parts. And so, yeah, there's always a rejection of like, this is a spiritual duty. But I think that leaning in, working hard, giving an example, providing access, it typically changes a person's mindset about it once they get a chance to experience it. But for the most part, it's a defense mechanism that's usually up because fear of rejection. As a Black man, I normally knew that I could not go into certain stores in certain areas of town or certain fitness places. And it was due to, fear of rejection, or in some cases, because our country's not new to this, we haven't graduated to a certain space. In some cases, just not actually legally having access, or, not being allowed. And so when we really take a holistic look at some of these, the statistics, and see who's suffering from from diabetes and some of these other things, it is about access. And so that is part of the work that needs to be done in order to kind of help break the mindset, is to give and provide access and experience. Does that kind of answer in?
Yeah, absolutely. And Phil, do you have anything that you want? I mean, I think it was nice because you tied in what Aaron jumped off on just a few minutes ago with kind of that system of wealth and health, and you know, as you say, the injustice of that, and it's real, and it really does take resources and dedication, and it's just like, you know, any other ministry to go to those who are in need, but to see health as a need.
I don't know how to follow that. That was great. I was just enthralled. I want you just to keep going.
It's tough having
you know,
Andru on. He's just he's always doing that.
But yeah, I mean, you know, my experience, I think just in a different context, it has just a little bit of a different focus that I think it's going to change again now that we're moving. But in the church I've been serving now for a number of years, I think the biggest question was, what was the level of the bar of entry that was being placed? And of course, for me, this is through yoga, right? And so it is through stretching, breathing, praying. It's from a Christian perspective, but there's of course the level of questions of, are we allowed to do this, right? And so there's sort of that whole conversation of what we won't do in yoga, what we do in yoga, but then really sort of inviting people to know that it's not about looking like or doing it like someone else does, and really sort of being conscious that, you know, we had people participating that were in their 50s and 60s, and then I had some students that were in high school and college who were like, I've never done this either and have no idea what I'm doing. So there was sort of, for me, it was very much a entering into a space where people didn't do it because they didn't know how, they didn't know what to do, they didn't know how much to do, they didn't know, you know, all these sort of questions. And so my experience has been very much just coming alongside people and meeting them where they are and finding out, what are your goals? What are you hoping from this? Where are you wanting to go? And sort of putting people at ease that, yeah, you know, if you go to your local gym and you don't look like anyone else there and you feel like, well, what's the point? I can't bench press, you know, 300 pounds. What am I going to do? Or I'm not, you know, I don't look like in yoga pants like someone else does, or whatever it may be. I think it's been a lot about creating a safe space where, again, and this is where I just return to that community orientation, where it was a safe space for everyone who is involved, and sort of then knowing, hey, we can ask questions, we can sort of go where different people are going. So yeah, I mean, I think it depends on community, and I think it depends on knowing who's in front of you, where are they at, why are they there, what do they need, and rather than coming with, here's what I want everyone to get out of this, I think there's very much the question of laying aside our goals and plans and just meeting people where they are. And rather than going from A all the way to S or T, can we just go from A to B and for that to be enough?
That's fantastic.
Sorry. Can I just say,
yeah,
before you move on, these guys have way more actual practical experience. But one thing I've noticed is that, particularly around, you know, Christian yoga, as I've seen it practiced here and with friends I know who do it, I think there's like when people hear that it is a possibility, or to do the thing that they like about yoga, to stretch and build up strength and breathe well and all, but to do it with a Christian intention and a Christian practice, I think people get excited, and I can't help but wonder if you know, the fact that the church has largely absented itself from fitness spaces, from gyms, from, I don't know, rowing clubs, from whatever, you know, like we said, we'll take this part over here and y'all go do whatever you want in your spare time. And I wonder if, because we haven't done the work to say that what, you know, taking care of yourself physically, well, you can do it just for the sheer pleasure of it, or to look good, or whatever. Like there can be a deeper spiritual component to it. And so when the church doesn't show up in those places, it makes them seem not Christian.
Yeah.
Right.
Or not important.
So,
Yeah.
anyway.
Well, and I think we've missed a major opportunity with that, because people are finding health and some sort of wholeness in whatever level that might be in those other spaces. And because we're not there, and by we, I mean the church universal, we're missing the opportunity of sharing good news with people who are looking for it. And then they're thinking, I cannot find it in the church because I'm finding it here and the church isn't there. It's almost like we're turning it into a dichotomy if I must choose one or the other. So I think we're losing an opportunity by not being in those spaces too. And honestly, maybe pushing people away.
Yeah, I think, this is one of the reasons why it's important for churches to reassess, their values, their core values, and whether you're planting new churches or whether you're a well-established church, to make sure that you haven't gone mission drift from that. So, for example, I like to always think of the YMCA as one of the prime examples of mission drift, where I remember having a membership at the YMCA for a group of men who were in recovery. And the Y said, hey, we're going to be known as the Y now. And just being known as the Y is taking out that C, that the Christian in the YMCA title. And it's a branding thing. They didn't want to be branded with something that no longer wanted to be branded with it. It was simple business. You can't blame the YMCA for rebranding and moving away from that space. And I think that those type of things of, well, what will we do with our space? And it goes back to the justice piece. If I have a church with a large field, will I create a playground for children? Will our church do something to assure that our seniors are moving, that our children are active? Will we create, even in our Cornelia time, will we create a space where let's get up and stretch? What will we do to be mindful of inserting some things that are just basic biblical principles into not just, hey, let's share a meal together. But, Jesus also took some pretty long walks with his disciples, too. They journey from one city to the next. And, in context, I understand that I live in Vancouver, Washington. I'm not going to go and walk up to Vancouver, BC. But point is, am I even physically able? So, I really feel like we have to go back and, do better about taking an uncolonized look at the Bible, taking a look at and just saying, okay, Holy Spirit, show me what's really there, what's really being said, without the filters that I've put over it to feed my consumerism, to feed my comfort. How do I get uncomfortable with this life that you've given me so that I can be more comfortable in this life with you? And I think that that's one of the key factors that I always try to encourage church planters or even established pastors to do, is to implement it. It's never too late to change some of those methods and that we've been accustomed to.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to sum it up. Kind of the future is integration in some ways, of just putting these pieces back together. And I love to dream into that. Churches do all sorts of crazy things in order to get new people in the door. What kind of new people would you get in the door if you had a great gym? And it's like, oh yeah, I'm a member because the gym's great, and I go to service every once in a while. It's not bad, actually. Or God forbid, there should be a healthy meal at fellowship, after service. How many times have I looked at that giant tray of macaroni salad and been like, oh boy.
Yeah, don't take away my donuts.
Yeah, I know. Well, this has been great, guys. I've heard a lot. I just want to kind of say some of the points that everybody kind of made, and just let you guys say goodbye, and maybe run with one point if it resonates with you. We talked a lot about, it's not about what you look like, it's about how you feel and what's going on with you under the surface. That you need it's about relationship and the competency to know who you're talking to and what you can say to them in your present relationship. And there was a lot of talk about things like endurance, discomfort, doing things scared, and the sense of for fitness, that's actually something that we're actually pretty, like, we associate fitness with, I have to do no pain, no gain. How does that, I guess, translate into spiritual life too? Like, those two things came up. So those were interesting points. And if anybody wants to pick up any of them, we'll wrap it up.
I think the last thing I would want to just say about this, and thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this. And, we just have to be very mindful and very careful of just the reality of the world we live in, and pay attention to the language that is co-opting our faith or taking like so for example, Holy Spirit's comforter, but we have comfort food, and we'll serve comfort food in church and then wonder, like, well, why aren't we feeling God's spirit? And it's like, well, you replace the comforter with your other comforter, like it's sometimes that may be like a very surface level way of looking at it, but sometimes it does speak to the reality of who we are and how we find peace in the places that we seek to be. So, just pay close attention to the signs. And here's the funny thing. You can pay close attention to the signs, and this is just a vulnerable part of my testimony. Even with the knowledge, without community, you could still find yourself falling directly into it. Like it's like knowing where you're going. You're not being led astray. You're actually driving yourself there. So sometimes having community means that you get a chance to let someone else take the wheel, and you let someone else encourage you, because that intrinsic motivation that you receive from being a part of a group or being in that group setting with your fitness and taking other people on the journey, it's just part of that discipleship process. And it helps us really look more like, we are intended to look as God's beautiful bride, as the church. So that's really where I would leave it as far as my part in this today.
Yeah, I'm grateful to be part of this too. I feel like I said, I feel like a bit of a ringer, but I forget when exactly I started thinking about this over the course of this conversation, but thinking about a certain current fitness craze that people are really into. Am I allowed to use like brand names on here? I don't even know.
Sure.
Well, I'm thinking about CrossFit, right? And like, what do people love about CrossFit? I mean, it's challenge, it's community. Like, there's this super supportive. Like people develop relationships there, and they get an endorphin rush. And people, I'm willing to bet that people skip church to go to CrossFit if they have a choice. And that's just another sort of, I think that we need to pay attention to the things that people are chasing after for fulfillment, and not try to emulate them, but just respond to what clearly seems to be a pretty deep spiritual need that gets coupled with our physical life. So yeah, thanks for including me in this.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I've enjoyed talking with you and hearing all your perspectives. I have a lot more to think about. I think, Andru, we need to talk more about justice and fitness with Cornelius and with Aaron in another setting, because I think this is a big conversation. I think we should do again and go deeper. But yeah, I mean, I would just encourage people, again, keep listening well. Listen to your body well. Listen, as others were talking about too. What is God maybe inviting you to do today to feel in your body, to honor it, to listen to it, and to take care of it, and to do it with others who can sort of keep you on the path?
Well, that is wonderful. Thank you all, guys. It is just a joy to be able to talk with all of you. You all have so much life experience and so much perspective. And it's just great just to even think about the possibilities, because, you have the mandate, the greatest mandate there is, which is to do God's work on earth. And so really, you can do anything. And so it's been a joy. And yeah, let's do it again. Thanks, everybody. Until next time, Maranatha.